Hi guys, it's Janice. We usually read picture books, but today I have a junior fiction with you. It's called A Series of Unfortunate Events, and it's the first book of the series called The Bad Beginning. See number 1 right here. There are about at least 13-14 books in the series, and this is the first one. So let's get started with some of the chapters. The Bad Beginning. Chapter 1. If you're interested in stories with happy endings, you would be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there's no happy beginning and very few happy things in the middle. This is because not very many happy things happen in the lives of the 3 Baudelaire youngsters. Violet, Claus, and Sunny Baudelaire were intelligent, very clever children, and they were charming and resourceful, and have pleasant facial features. They were all good-looking, but they were extremely unlucky. And most everything that happened to them was rife with misfortune, mystery, and despair. Very, very sad. I'm very sorry to tell you this, but that is how the story goes. Their misfortune began one day at Briny Beach. The 3 Baudelaire children lived with their parents in an enormous, giant, very big mansion at the heart of a dirty and busy city. And occasionally, once in a while, their parents gave them permission to take a rickety trolley. The word rickety trolley. The word rickety, you probably know, here means unsteady, so always moving around or likely to collapse. Alone to the seashore, where they would spend the day as a sort of vacation, like holiday, as long as they were home for dinner. This particular morning, it was grey and cloudy, which didn't bother the Baudelaire youngsters one bit. When it was hot and sunny, Briny Beach was crowded with tourists, and it was impossible to find a good place to lay one's blanket to sit down. On grey and cloudy days, the Baudelaires had the beach to themselves to do whatever they liked, because nobody would like to go to the beach on a grey and cloudy day. Violet Baudelaire, the eldest, liked to skip rocks. Like most 14-year-olds, she was right-handed, so the rocks skipped farther across the murky water when Violet used her right hand than when she used her left. As she skipped rocks, she was looking out at the horizon, looking up at the sky, and thinking about an invention she wanted to build. Anyone who knew Violet well could tell she was thinking hard, because her long hair was tied up in a ribbon to keep it out of her eyes. Violet had a real knack for inventing and building strange devices, so her brain was often filled with images of pulleys, levers, and gears, and she never wanted to be distracted by something as trivial, as little, as random as her hair. This morning, she was thinking about how to construct a device that could retrieve a rock after you had skipped it into the ocean. So skipping a rock is when you have a little piece of rock and you throw it into the ocean, and then the rock would skip on the surface of the water, right? Claus Baudelaire, the middle child and the only boy, liked to examine creatures in the tide pools. Claus was a little older than 12 and wore glasses, which made him look very clever and intelligent. He was really intelligent. The Baudelaire parents had an enormous library in their house, a room filled with thousands and thousands of books on nearly every subject, on everything. Being only 12 years old, Claus, of course, had not read all of the books in the Baudelaire library. But he had read a great many of them and had retained a lot of information from his readings. So he had learned a lot from reading books. He knew how to tell an alligator from a crocodile. He knew who killed Julius Caesar. And he knew much about the tiny, slimy animals at the briny beach, which he was examining now because they're at the beach now, right? Sunny Baudelaire, the youngest, liked to bite things. She was an infant. She was very little, maybe 3-4 months. She was an infant and very small for her age, scarcely larger than a boot. A boot. The baby was even smaller than one boot. While she lacked in size, however, she made up for with the size and sharpness of her 4 teeth. She's got 4 teeth. Sunny was at an age where one mostly speaks a series of unintelligible shrieks. So when a baby doesn't know how to speak, they will go ee, ooh, ah, ah, something like that. Except when she used a few actual words in her vocabulary like bottle, mommy, and bite. Most people had trouble understanding what it was that Sunny was saying. For instance, this morning she was saying gack over and over, which probably meant, look at that mysterious figure emerging from the fog. Sure enough, in the distance along the misty shore of briny beach, there could be seen a tall figure striding toward the Baudelaire children. Sunny had already been staring and shrieking at the figure for some time when Claus looked up from the spiny crab he was examining and saw it too. He reached over and touched Violet's arm, bringing her out her inventing thoughts. Look at that, Claus said, and pointed towards the figure. It was drawing closer, and the children could see a few details. It was about the size of an adult, the size of a grown-up like your mom or your dad, except its head was tall and rather square. A square head? What do you think it is? Violet asked. I don't know, Claus said, squinting at it, but it seems to be moving right towards us. It's coming to us. We're alone on the beach, Violet said, a little nervously. There's nobody else it could be moving toward. We are the only people on the beach. Of course, this thing is coming to us. She felt the slender, smooth stone in her left hand, which she had been about to try to skip as far as she could. She had a sudden thought to throw it at the figure, because it seemed very frightening. Could it be a ghost? What could it be? It only seems scary, Claus said, as if reading his sister's thoughts. Because of all the mist and fog, you can't really see clearly. This was true. As the figure reached them, the children saw with relief that it was not anybody frightening at all, but somebody they knew, Mr. Poe. Mr. Poe was a friend of Mr. and Mrs. Baudelaire's, whom the children had met many times at dinner parties. One of the things Violet, Claus, and Sunny really liked about their parents was that they didn't send their children away when they have company over, but allowed them to join the adults at the dinner table and participate in the conversation as long as they helped clear the table. Do you help clear the table at home? The children remembered Mr. Paul because he always had a cold and was constantly excusing himself from the table to have a fit of coughing in the next room. Mr. Pole took off his top hat, which had made his head look large and square in the fog, and stood for a moment, coughing loudly in a white handkerchief. Violet and Klaus moved to shake his hand and say, "How do you do?" "How do you do?" said Violet. "How do you do?" said Klaus. "Oh, do you?" said Sunny, because remember, Sunny was the baby. "Fine, thank you," said Mr. Pole, but he looked very sad. For a few seconds, nobody said anything, and the children wondered what Mr. Pole was doing here at Briny Beach, when he could have been at the bank in the city, where he worked. He was not dressed for the beach. "It's a nice day," Violet said finally, making conversation. Sunny made a noise that sounded like an angry bird, and Klaus picked her up and held her. "Yes, it is a nice day," Mr. Pole said absently, staring out at the empty beach. "I'm afraid I have some very bad news for you children." The three Baudelaire siblings looked at him. Violet, with some embarrassment, felt the stone in her left hand and was glad she had not thrown it at Mr. Pole. "Your parents," Mr. Pole said, "have perished in a terrible fire." The children didn't say anything. "They perished," Mr. Pole said, "in a fire that destroyed the entire house." "I'm very, very sorry to tell you this, my dears." Violet took her eyes off Mr. Pole and stared out at the ocean. Mr. Pole had never called the Baudelaire children my dears before. She understood the words he was saying, but thought he must be joking, playing a terrible joke on her and her brother and sister. "Perished," Mr. Pole said, "means killed." "We know what that word perished means," Klaus said crossly, very angrily. He did know what the word perished meant, but he was still having trouble understanding exactly what it was that Mr. Pole had said. It seemed to him that Mr. Pole must somehow have misspoken. They were thinking, "Is it really true? My parents have died?" "The fire department arrived, of course," Mr. Pole said, "but they were too late. The entire house was engulfed in fire. It burned to the ground." Klaus pictured all the books in the library going up in flames. Now he'd never read all of them again anymore. Mr. Pole coughed several times into his handkerchief before continuing. "I was sent to retrieve you here, to take you to my home, where you'll stay for some time while we figure things out. I'm the executor of your parents' estate. That means I'll be handling their enormous fortune, the money your parents have, and figuring out where you children will go. When Violet comes of age, the fortune will be yours, but the bank will take charge of it until you are old enough, so you can't have the money now." Although he said he was the executor, Violet felt like Mr. Pole was the executioner. He had simply walked down the beach to them and changed their lives forever. "Come with me," Mr. Pole said, and held out his hand. In order to take it, Violet had to drop the stone she was holding. Klaus took Violet's other hand, and Sunny took Klaus's other hand. And in that manner, the three Baudelaire children, the Baudelaire orphans now, because they don't have any parents now, were led away from the beach and from their previous lives.